Hey guys, this is Adam with another tutorial. Today I'm going to be talking about my approach to dialing in guitar tones for rock and metal music. Today I'm using the AxeFX, but these principles can be applied to any amp modeler or just recording an actual amp and cab with a microphone. I'm using my Ibanez RGA7 today, tuned to drop D, and I'm just going to go step by step into my pretty simple approach to dialing in these tones. As you can see, I have a cab block loaded up already. I'm going to be using, it's actually a stock cabinet made by ML Sound Lab, and you can buy their packages online. I highly recommend it. They sound amazing. This is the Cabback 13, I believe. Also, I have a noise gate at the front. I don't do anything too aggressive. I just want to get any excess noise out of the way when I start to amplify things. And the amp I'm going to be using is called the Fast Modern, which is Fractal Audio's own concoction. Just a really heavy amp. It kind of sounds like a rectifier. So one quick thing before we get started. It's important to know when you're dialing in a tone, especially for a mix, what you're going for tonally. And it's important to reference songs, in my opinion, so you can hear what makes up a good guitar tone as far as the balance of your frequencies and just the tonality, the style in general. So I'm going to play a mix with a guitar tone that I'm proud of, and let's just see how it sounds. So let's hear what we got as it is. Alright, sounded pretty awesome. But as compared to the mix we heard before, it's a little bit dark and a little bit muffled, and the mid-range seems a little bit muddied up. So we're just going to make some steps here to clear that up and make it sound more mix-ready. So as you can see, the bright switch is turned on, which really opens up the high end in my opinion. And the brightness knob right here just adds a little bit more of that effect. So I'm just going to move it up until... Cool. So, since we're heading that direction, I might as well just turn up a little treble. Cut the bass out a little bit. You don't need all that super low end, especially when you're working with a mix. You need that bass to play a role and fill a space, and if the guitars are going to be too bassy, it could really cause some trouble with clarity in your mix. Another thing is the input drive. I tend to lower the drive to the point where if you play a note softly, you hear almost no breakup or distortion at all. So basically, how hard you pick is going to create the distortion and aggression for you. And as a result, you get a very clear guitar tone. So one thing I like to do is keep things simple. I tend not to add EQs or anything and make it very simple going into the DAW. And the AxeFX is very good at making tones just ready to go if you know what you're aiming at. All these sections have a lot of great options, but I think the important thing to know is if you don't know what it does, why mess with it, especially if the tone is heading in the right direction. It could be just me playing games with my own ears, but I hear that it makes a difference. Is lower the sag all the way to as close to 0 as you can without PA off. And then also making that transformer match go down just a little bit. I feel like it just opens up the tone. I'm not an expert in the field of amp electronics, so I could be just talking nonsense, but I feel that if it sounds better, it sounds better, so. So when I load up my cab, the only thing that I really pay attention to is just your low cut and high cut. I like to get rid of the frequencies I know I'm not going to need, and for a recording, I'm not going to need anything below 100 Hertz or anything above about 8K-ish. I don't load a mic up unless I feel that it needs some sort of EQ adjustment. None tends to sound pretty good to me, so it's really a sort of a preference thing. But other than that, I just leave it alone. So one thing that tends to add a little bit more aggression and articulation is a drive pedal, and all different sorts of amp modelers have it. Or if you have your own pedal, that's perfect. I prefer to use the model of the TS808, so let's just throw that guy in there. This is just the way that it sounds without messing with it. Talking about this drive pedal really quick. The drive knob itself I tend to avoid. I use this more as just what a filter EQ would do before an amp. You're getting rid of some of these extra frequencies that could cause what I hear is muddiness. And the drive could easily introduce that back in if you're not too careful with it. So I just want to kind of lift up the tone, add some aggression, and leaving the drive at 0 does just that. The tone you can experiment with. I tend to just keep it in this sort of region, too far right. It could get a little too ice picky and aggressive, and to the left it gets a little dark. So I can show you real quick. So there's a little EQ boost option. I just did this based off of just what I heard. I thought a little bit of the higher stuff of the drive could go away, and a little bit of the muddiness could go away. It's very subtle changes though. I tend to like this sort of frequency. Don't really know why, but it just adds a certain character to the tone that I'm really a big fan of. Here's the guitar tone before any of the moves I made. And here's the guitar tone after. Although I was listening to a rock song when dialing in this tone, this type of tone can be perfect for the metal type of stuff too. It's just, it really relies a lot on how aggressively you pick, but it really suits my needs for either style, and this is my approach for any type of genre, in that sort of vein of more aggressive guitar-driven genres. One thing to note is that different guitars may have different sort of frequencies or build-ups based off of material your wood's made out of, or your pickups, or all those different variables. I, for instance, always hear something at about 7 to 800 that builds up, and as you start to layer, you'll start to hear these different aspects of your guitar tone start to build up and not sound too pleasant. So I'm going to go ahead and take that out. I'm sure there are some people that think this guitar is lacking body or power, but you have to keep in mind that there's drums and bass and even vocals occupying the same space. And if you have too much low end or too much high end, it could really cause a lot of harm to your mix and the clarity of your mix. And the guitars, when they're layered, can have effects that you wouldn't necessarily think would happen. So here's the guitar tone double tracked. And here is the entire mix with the guitar tone. tip. I think it's important to keep in mind when you're dialing in a guitar tone that as soon as you decide to do any stereo tracking, like 2 guitars or 4 guitars even, you're going to start to smooth out the high end a lot. So let me play the tone centered and by itself. Then here is the stereo double track version, so you can hear the difference. Although it's really important to achieve a nice clear guitar tone, it's important never to underestimate the value of a good bass and a good drum sound paired along with it. I feel that if you achieve a great sound on the guitars and it's paired with a bad bass tone or just a not very good drum sound, it can really ruin everything you work for in the guitar and make the mix as a whole not quite there. So I'd like to play my bass and drums without the guitars just so you can see what I'm talking about. So I know there's always loads more to talk about when discussing things like dialing in a tone for a mix, but I think what's important to take away from this is to keep it simple and use your ear, and don't underestimate the other variables in your mix, like your drums and your bass, because they're really pushing that mix just as much as the guitars are. So I hope this was a helpful tutorial. If you guys have any questions, just leave a comment.